Well, welcome to this episode of Notes on the Sideline. I'm your host and content creator, Safdar Khan. My goal is to connect parents, coaches, referees, all stakeholders in youth soccer and have great discussions and talks, arguments about the game we love. I also will have a disclaimer. The content of this podcast is mine own and does not reflect the official position of my employer, the Ohio State University. It is such an honor to have my guest today, someone who I value greatly, a good friend, and someone who is really the sage of youth soccer. We have Steve Locker on today. Steve, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you. I'm excited to chat with you. I love what you're doing, and obviously the topic of youth sports is very, very dear and close to my heart. So love chatting about it.
And so we know, and almost all of us probably know, the brand, Locker Soccer brand, is such a strong brand in Central Ohio. What you've done with your academy, with the youth programs that you have. But I want to understand, and I want to scratch the surface a little bit. And for those of our listeners who know the brand but don't know necessarily Steve, I'm going to give an introduction which hopefully is going to make you blush. Steve has over 20 years of experience in collegiate coaching, 7 years at Harvard, 3 years at the University of Rochester, 6 years at Otterbein, and you won 8 league championships, including 2 Ivy League titles. You've coached along your long, illustrious career as a youth coach, players that have been drafted in the MLS, several All-Americans. You've also had over a dozen academic All-Americans. But this doesn't even reflect what you've been able to achieve in your own life, Steve. You played collegiate soccer for Penn State, and you were also an international soccer player for Hannover 96 in the German Bundesliga. You have the distinction of being the first American to earn a professional coaching diploma from Germany. And what is even more fascinating, when I thought the accolades would end, you worked with AC Milan in Italy and the only American to be offered a position working with their youth academy. So who better to really understand this complex topic of youth soccer than Steve? So I'm really excited.
Well, I thank you. And, it's interesting that I actually never coached youth soccer until after my playing days were over and after my actually 19 full years in the college game. And at that point, I did delve into the youth range. And so, it's been like a dual career for me, one at the highest level, or one of the highest levels. Back at the time, that was about the highest level. The MLS began somewhere in the middle of my collegiate career, but I felt that I almost did things backwards. I often wish that I would have had the experience working with children before working with college players, but nevertheless, the college experience was really, really valuable. I've always navigated my career based on how much enjoyment I'm having in that position. And so I was fortunate to do a lot of interesting things within the game, starting out early. And then, once I figured out what really, really mattered to me, having my own children at a very young age, it was this pursuit of working with young children that led to my kind of advocacy for youth sports as well. So it's been an interesting path. It's been fun.
One of the things that I, in preparation for this, obviously having known you now for a little bit, was you gave a TED Talk, and a TED Talk that was so succinct and I think was so encapsulating the Locker Soccer philosophy, as it were. Tell me a little bit about what led to that TED Talk, and those of our listeners who are interested, please go on YouTube, go to wherever you can access TED Talk Columbus, and you'll hear Steve talk about the Locker Soccer philosophy and the ideas of development around youth soccer. I'll add also that you, in addition, have a master's in education. So tell me a little bit about sort of that philosophy, the locker soccer philosophy that led to that TED Talk?
I think, it was interesting. I, um, I was watching the way we as a country approach the development of children. And I've had a chance to do this in my earlier career at the higher levels, spending a lot of time in Germany, a lot of time in Italy, and seeing the ebb and flow of their development, and being experienced enough to question what was happening. It was in the late 1990s. I was considering a move to Germany to coach, and and I was watching a U19 game. And as I watched that game, I thought, this game is a mess. It was absolutely terrible. And it was fast, it was brutal, it was not technical, it was just power, power, power. And it was ironic that around that time, the German national team was struggling. They struggled for a few years. They since have gotten back on the right track, but we see this periodically. And I saw it in Italy, taking teams over to Italy of boys in the 18, 19-year-old range and playing and watching the way that the game is played in those countries. And at times it was wonderful. Other times it was really disappointing. I watched games in Spain, and there was much better at the time that I was watching. So I've seen different levels, and I've been able to take a step back and examine what I felt personally, based on my experience, was good soccer, good development, and I was able to address it. I think I'm fortunate that I was an incredible student of the game when I lived in Germany. I really, really studied the game hard, and I was preparing to go to the coaching academy. And so with that in mind, I wanted to have the absolute best understanding of the game that I could get. And so, especially in Germany, and so they had never had an American in the coaching school, and it was all done in German. And so I wanted to be as prepared as I could, and it was incredible. And so I'm able to look at the game from a completely different lens than I think most people can look at the game based on those experiences. And as I do that, I'm able to examine what I think works and what I think does not work. I was very fortunate to befriend a guy when I was at Harvard who actually was from Columbus, and he was a child development professor. And when I came up with this notion of creating an academy for children, he was the first person I called. And he brought along another child development professor, and they really impressed upon me for the more academic approach to working with children, some of the things that I didn't think about. And so we were able, throughout the course of a year, in our many brainstorming sessions, create content. And I was able to learn a lot about this process. And it is a process, the developmental process of children through the various stages. And I had a bunch of that because I really loved studying psychology when I was in graduate school. And so I was able to take that kind of a background into my academy. I didn't want to be the old coach with a whistle around my neck playing red light, green light, or whatever it was that everybody does with children. I wanted it to be really steeped in developmental processes. And so, and then as my children grew and I started working with more and more kids in their ages at the age of 6 and 7 and 8, I really studied what was happening. Little things like I would sit at the end of the field when my son was 7 years old playing 3-on-3. And I noticed that every time he touched the ball, he would then afterwards look at me. And he was looking at me to see what kind of reaction I had. Was it one of approval? Was it one of a disappointment? Was it one of excitement? Whether he scored a goal or missed a goal or gave the ball away, it didn't matter. He always turned around and looked at me, and I see this in children all the time. And immediately I realized I did not want him to perform based on my reaction. So I stopped letting him know that I was watching him. So I loved watching, of course, we all do as parents. But what I did was every time he touched the ball, as soon as he was done touching the ball, it was at that moment when I knew he would turn around, because I've seen it so many times.
Yeah.
I just turned away and I didn't let him know that I was watching. And so it wasn't very long before he stopped turning and to look at me, and he started playing for himself.
He just focused on his own development, his one foot
Right.
after the other, rather than looking for approval
Yes,
from the sideline.
exactly. And almost all children go through this. Some may not, but it's really interesting to watch. And so for me, I wanted him to play for himself, because I know in these kinds of environments, when kids play for themselves, the reward factors are increasingly higher. They forget about making mistakes. They don't worry about making mistakes. Their passion for playing, their love for playing increases significantly when they're playing on their own terms. Much like when I grew up, we played pickup 5 days a week. Monday through Friday was every day was a pickup game at a different place, a different backyard, a different park. Saturday was training, Sunday was game. I only worked with a trainer, a coach, my coach, on Saturdays, and we would play games on Sundays. But Monday through Friday, we played pickup until I graduated from high school. And 8 of us in my senior class went to play Division I. And so when I look at that, I think, something was working there. Something was right.
Yeah.
And so as I watch kids, I watched all of my son's friends grow through the elementary, middle school, and high school years, playing in the winter only pickup, and they all developed at such a really interesting rate, and did very, very well. And I thought there is some value to that. I think when we adults watch a game, or if we're coaching kids, we want to impart our knowledge of what we know upon them, just for whatever reason. For me, it's not so much that, because I don't need that stroking of my ego. I've been able to coach the game at so many levels, and I've had so much success with it, that I don't need to have my ego stroked when I'm working with 8-year-olds or 10-year-olds or whatever it is. And so I don't think about winning games. I think about the day-to-day growth and confidence, and self-esteem, and the ability to overcome adversity. All of those things are really, really the most critical aspects to this.
And I think this is great, because it segues into something that I'm going to encourage every parent on this who's listening to this. Steve also has written a book, and that book is called Playing for the Long Run. It is an incredible read. Those of you who are able to, please order this book, please read it. It is such a succinct, incredible look at Steve's 30-year experience. I mean, I was reading this enthralled. I've been reading it for the last couple of days in preparation of this conversation with you, and almost every issue. And I'll tell you I'll repeat what I think started when I spoke to Jeff Starks, that you know very well, a friend of ours, last time. Was the reason why I wanted to start this is there's so many conversations on the sideline that parents have with coaches, coaches have with players, players are having with refs, parents are having with their own kids and players, that we're losing something in this conversation, because we have, in my opinion at least, we've tethered so much to a particular pathway in youth soccer. And what I mean by that is, you just brought up how simple pickup, without any tether, without any, overcoaching these kids, let them enjoy. And, I really wanted to have this conversation with you, building up to sort of the U7 to U10 kind of age range, the developmental principles for parents to understand, for maybe young coaches to learn from you, and players to absorb. What are the developmental, and when I don't mean Piaget, like the true psychology development, but in terms of soccer, what are the developmental principles in your philosophy that as parents we should be looking at or paying attention to from U7 to U11 or so? And then I'll go break it down further beyond that.
Right. This is a really great question. And um, I think there definitely is some relativity to Piaget's stages of development and your stages of development with your children in soccer. Um, One of my biggest messages to parents is to please be patient with the process. It is a really, really hard thing for parents to do. Um, we are a culture of convenience. We want everything now. We want it packaged nice. We want our kids on the best teams and the best uniforms and with the best results and all of that. And it's not how it works. Um, it's a process. You can't prepare your 8-year-old to be a successful high school player at the age of 8. You can't prepare your 15-year-old to be a professional or a successful player in college, and so on and so forth. It's like, it's like taking your 8-year-old and putting them in trade classes, or all these different complex kinds of activities. Sports is the same way. We have to be patient. The kids change as well. I mean, as soon as they hit that 12, 13, 14 age range and they start going through puberty, it's incredible the changes that take place. And everyone looks at the technical, the tactical parts of the game. I don't even teach tactics. I think I don't believe in teaching tactics. I believe in playing in small-sided games where kids can learn the relationships between other players around them. If you think about it from this perspective, you take a 7 or 8-year-old and you look at them and you think, okay, what is the scope of their vision? What can they see? They can't hit a 70-yard ball across the field to an open player on the other flank. They might be able to hit a nice pass to a player who is 10 yards away. When they play the game, their head is down and focused on the ball, not focused on all of the things that are happening, outside of another, a 5 to 10 yard range. And so when I work with kids, I try to maintain a range that makes sense for their age group so that they're learning to work with 1 or 2 players around them. And as they get older, they can start to add that 4th player or that 5th player. I tell people all the time, 16 years as a head coach, I rarely ever played 11v11 in training with my college kids. We worked mostly 5-on-5 or smaller with goalkeepers in a 40 by 40 area. Nothing larger than that, rarely. We worked a lot on small-sided games, limited touches, all kinds of stipulations that would make them think and make decisions in a faster way, so that they could react to situations that they were presented with in the game. And
So let
then,
me ask you this,
yeah,
Dean. So for the U7, U6, U7 to U10 age range, U11, I should say. So that is sort of the fundamental, let's love the game. Let's love the ball. One thing you said in your TED talk, which was so fascinating, was, the night before we're telling our kids, learn how to share,
yeah,
learn how to be collaborative with play. But the minute the U7, 8, 6 player is on the pitch, parents are yelling, grab the ball, run, grab the ball. And so there's this dichotomy that you actually segue even in your book, how in the rest of culture right now, the sports that we play, football, basketball, there's time for coaching within the game. So you have moments where coaches can talk to players, coach them, and then send them out. Not so much in this beautiful game of soccer, where kids have to make decisions in real time with their partners and their teammates. And that's a factor that I think, if taught early, and that's clearly what you're doing, reaps benefits as the player matures to enter the second phase. What are your thoughts on that?
yeah. I think, I always use the example of, parents telling kids what to do in the game, and sometimes even coaches. I mean, I think there's this egotistical thing going on in coaching where the coaches feel like they have to be part of the show even at the highest levels, and they're all ranting and raving and gesticulating about different things. And it's like, just sit down and let these guys play. They've earned the right to play. If you're a good coach and you've done your job in the training, they can go out and play because it is their game. They're the ones making decisions. We can't make decisions for them. We don't stop the game and say, okay, now let's do this, or let's change the play. And so I think, going back to your point, I ask parents, when your child is playing in a game and you yell at them onto the field to kick the ball, take a shot, move up, push back. If you can tell parents and ask parents, please don't talk to your kids. And it's like, yeah, whatever. But then if you ask a parent and you present it to them and say, listen, every time you tell your child something on the field, you're robbing them of an opportunity to learn how to make a decision.
Yeah.
And if you ask a parent, would you like to continue to rob your child of these decision-making opportunities? In most cases, they're going to say, I don't think I would like to do that. I think I would rather shut up and let them learn, because in a game, they're not going to get hurt. And if I'm a parent of a 16-year-old and I say, here's the keys to my car, go have fun with your friends tonight. Have I taught them how to make good decisions on their own? And I think it starts in these kinds of little environments, when they're in youth sports, by just, giving them the trust to make their own decisions. And it's a really, really difficult thing, because as parents, we want our kids to succeed. We don't want them to suffer. We don't want them to face adversity. And we all know if you've achieved athletically, that you've had to go through a lot of adversity to achieve and to be successful. And yet, if we keep rescuing them from adverse situations and helping them through adverse situations, they're never going to learn how to do it. And when they continue to get faced with these decisions, they're going to give up. And I think if you can educate parents from that perspective, and the light will go on, and they will say, you know what, you're right. We need to be quiet. We need to let these kids just play. Yeah. And that will help. But I think it's really hard for parents, because they all want their kids so much.
Yeah. And so I've had this conversation, which is really intriguing, especially in that I'm sticking to the U7 to U10 kind of.
Yeah, it's critical. Right now. Yeah, very
critical piece. Now, what do you do as a coach and a teacher? And I really firmly believe coaches are teachers, just like we have Cindy's a teacher, your wife Cindy's a teacher. I do believe that we're coaches. You guys are teachers. How do you approach a child in the U7, U9, U10 arena who starts off strong, whose parents are very supportive, they don't really say anything, but he or she starts sort of slowing down a little bit, loves the game, but may start slowing down, or you have a quieter, more introverted child who doesn't, speak out on the field. You have very extroverted young men and young women at that age who can take over the game, as it were. And then you have this introverted child who's not quite willing to step outside his or her comfort zone within that U7, U10 age range. How do you counsel that child? How do you coach that child to progress?
So, this is a great question, and I can talk about it. But one thing I would like to say about this right now is there's an added element to this range. There's an added element to every age range right now coming out of the pandemic. Yes. And what I'm seeing coming out of the pandemic is somewhat alarming, because our children have been really kind of packaged and put away for 2 years. Yeah. And getting reintroduced socially has proven to be a challenge right now. I'm seeing it in the behavior of children, the social confidence, the interaction skills, all of the interpersonal reaction skills. I'm seeing a lot of challenging situations. Now, that's just adding to what you describe as different types of personalities and characteristics in children. The one thing it's it's incredibly easy to win in youth sports. I watch it all the time.
Yeah.
I watch parents, and we live in the ultra competitive communities of like Dublin and UA and
Yeah.
Powell and everywhere else, and I watch these dads go around and collect the best athletes and the best kids for their U16 or U17, and guess what? They're the biggest, the strongest, the fastest kids, and they're going to win every time.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how much skill you have. You're not going to overcome athleticism at these young age groups. Not until they reach 12, 13, 14 will the skills start to take over. And this is tricky because parents don't always think of it that way. They think that the best, fastest, and strongest kids are going to be the world beaters all the way through, and they're not. They're the kids who get burned out. They've relied upon their God-given speed and strength and size and all of that to be successful, and they're not perhaps learning the skills that are necessary to succeed as the other kids start to catch up to them. And when the other kids catch up to them, it's almost devastating. I've watched the impact, and I think I talk about it in my TED Talk in regards to a friend's team who we played in, and we got beat by them for year after year in, year out. They just kept beating us. And finally, at age 12, our kids figured it out, and it was incredible the impact that it had on those children on both different teams, and that's why 70 to 75% of all kids quit sports by the age of 13.
Yeah. Yep.
And so that number was alarming. And that was the fact that kind of clicked in my brain and said, we need to change things. We need to do things differently.
And so going back to that introverted child coming out of the pandemic who does
Thank
have
you.
the desire or the skill, and his or her parents are very supportive, how do you coach that child to be part of the melee around him or her?
Right.
Very exuberant kids.
I think for me, it's about confidence. It's about self-esteem. It's about fun. Sometimes I think that parents get a little confused if they were to watch my training session, because my number one goal is to have fun.
Yeah.
And with that, what happens is the kids look forward to coming back. They're like, this was fun. I want to do it again. Right. And I always say to coaches in my coaching clinics, in the coaching education piece, your record is not based on how many games you won. Your record is based on how many kids came back to your team the next year. Mm-hmm. And so this is my number one goal, to keep kids in the game. And that's why my book is called Playing for the Long Run, right? Keeping kids in the game. And so you have to start off with the first notion, the most important thing, and that's make it fun. So you do fun things in practice. You don't spend a lot of time talking to kids in practice. You let them play. I call myself a environmental engineer, because what I try to do is I try to create the environment that allows them to learn without me having to talk to them. And so, I think, as you said, we're teachers. We have to understand what motivates children. And, I played every game I could play as a kid, whether it was run the bases or hide and seek, or it didn't matter. We played everything. It was because it was fun. Yeah. And so if we adults get too involved in the game, it's not going to be fun. I try to tell parents, do not talk to your kids on the way home. Guess what, parents? Kids do not want you to tell them
what they did.
They don't want you to dissect the game, or they don't want you to tell them what to do in the game. They want to play the game. And I've had so many interesting questions from parents. It's like, what should I tell my kid the night before a game? He's 7. It's like, don't tell him anything. He's not thinking about the game.
Yeah.
And so, it's like, just let them play and have fun.
And as we transition to sort of the U7, U11, now we're getting into the U11, say U4, 13, 14 range, which I know is sort of a very emotional time for kids, because they're just getting into sort of the early onset of adulthood, or sort of the precipice of adulthood for parents, because those are the ages that now we're dividing our team. This may be specific to youth soccer, which is really something I want to pick your brain on is now we're dividing our kids into different levels now.
Right.
So these, youth clubs or soccer clubs, big name soccer clubs, we're they're doing tryouts, right? So we have
Mhm.
these kids. The fees are, it's not cheap to have your child in a youth soccer system. And now at the U11, 12 level, we're starting to divide kids into Team A, Team B, and Team C. And we're having the quote unquote elite players or good players in Team A. Team B
Mhm.
has maybe the middle bloomers, and Team C are the ones that. So there's not really a mixed roster of kids, and they're all competing for tournaments and so on and so forth. Is there something generically dichotomy? Isn't that a dichotomy for development where at that age we're setting the bar for where we expect one group of kids to play and another bar where the other kids play, and you have a great chapter in your book called Forget the Big Fast Kids. I prefer the late bloomers. How do we
Yeah.
developmentally coach?
Yeah.
Because it's real. I mean, you have three tiers of teams
Yeah.
sometimes,
Yeah.
and explain your philosophy on the tiering system for teams in youth soccer at that
So
age.
yeah, it's a really important phase in the process again, and I think there the problem we often experience where we talk about the A team, the B team, and the C team is, as soccer coaches, it seems to me that they're trying to create a more level playing field, a consistent level of performance within the team, right? I get that. That can be important. The problem that I see in many of the systems that we have around, not just Central Ohio, but around the whole country, is that the focus gets too heavily placed upon those top players. And you hear it all the time about the other kids are really just paying fees that benefit the older kids, or they don't intermix the levels, and they don't give the kids on the B team or the C team a chance to play with the players on the A team. And so those players don't get challenged enough. And so that's where I think we hurt ourselves the most, by not letting these kids mix and play. Um, I understand now, if my son is on a team with your son, and my son is the weakest kid on the team, but he's on the team, right? Maybe somebody picked him to be on the A team because his last name is Locker, but he clearly can't play at that level. Okay, how many parents would feel kind of proud of the fact that their kid's on the A team? I remember asking a coach to put my kid on the B team. I hope he doesn't watch this podcast, but the fact was, he wasn't good enough for the A team at that age, right? At the younger age, because he would have lost confidence. He would have lost interest in the game. But try to tell a parent that you're putting their child on the B team because you want to grow their confidence. Whew, it's a
Yeah,
difficult
tough
conversation.
conversation to have. Yeah.
They do not get it. But I've seen so many kids driven out of the game because they got put on the team that's too high and they're not good enough and they can't keep up, and they lose confidence, they lose self-esteem. I would much rather see that child in an environment where they're having some success, growing confidence and self-esteem. And as they get older, especially like I was a late bloomer. My kid's a late bloomer.
Yeah.
And so I was in no hurry to see them succeed. And it was incredible how strong of a player my son became, as he was getting ready to graduate from high school, and, he went to a postgraduate year, which really helped him a lot. And he played back East, and then he went off to college, and then we had COVID, and I watched him play with some of the top kids from the top D1 schools as we trained through the winter and through COVID. And he was really, really playing well. And I thought, he has really grown nicely into a player, but yet at the earlier ages, you would have never picked him for, a top team. And
That's
so,
interesting, Steve.
so
And
yeah.
just as I extend what you're saying, it's very interesting because even in your book, you mentioned, obviously there's the athleticism part, right? It's a
Right.
physical game,
Right.
soccer is
Yep.
going to be always a physical game. So
Yeah.
you have those God-given athletes who are developing their athletic skill, but then you have the technical ability, you have some tactical understanding, but what you put most weight on in the youth athlete is resilience.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
said in your book that resilience, and I think that speaks to the parents, I think, whose child, they may be on the C team or B team, and there may be influx between A, B, and C, and there's crossover, and there's some seasons where you're playing up, some seasons where you come down. So resilience in the kids, I mean, again, we're talking about kids where U11, U13, 14, they're still trying to figure out who they are. They're just at the
Exactly.
precipice of puberty, these
Yeah.
young women and young men, to have their confidence jostled with at this age, I think is so important to understand that resilience is a bigger part of athleticism, tactical understanding, and technical ability.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's really important that these kids have the opportunity to dip their toe into the water of different levels. That's why in our club we have open play every Friday night for anyone who wants to come, and we mix the kids by abilities, by ages, and you'll hear some hemming and hawing and so forth. But at the end of the night, I mean, it's really the kids all go home happy, um, and we're putting them in different environments with different players. They'll come and say, "Oh, well, we want to be on the same team," and it's like, no, we like to make the teams as even as possible. When we played pickup as kids, if one team was winning by a lot of points,
Switch
we
over.
always changed the teams. We
Yeah,
tried to make them even.
yeah,
Nowadays, it's like, no, 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 we just want to win,
yeah,
and so we want them to learn how to play with kids who aren't as fast, aren't as good, and vice versa, and um, and no one gets hurt, right? There's no judgment. I try not to allow parents to talk to the kids when they're playing. Just ignore the kids. Let's let them play, and uh, and I think this is where the real learning takes place. And so I'm a huge fan of mixing kids and giving them opportunities. But when it comes to a game competition, let's be really careful about the disparity in playing abilities. It's really, you can get away with it a little bit, test the waters with the child. But I mean, I had a poor little girl that did not understand the game the other day. This is like I think a 10-year-old, 9 or 10-year-old. And she went out onto the field and she just felt completely out of place and stood still and cried.
yeah,
And I brought her off the field and we talked and I said, listen, this is not important. Just relax. I want you to have fun,
yeah.
and don't worry about making mistakes or where you kick the ball, where you run, or any of that kind of stuff. You just go out there and have fun. She was brand new. She wanted to play. And I thought, well, let's give her an opportunity. I had no idea that she was going to stress out. And she's, this poor kid struggling with stress in the first place, coming out of the pandemic. So we
Oh,
add that extra stress in her life, and it's like, no, no, this is not right. Let's fix this right away. And but I think kids have to be challenged. They have to learn to deal with the challenges and the adversity. It's all a part of that growth process. The other, and you talk about resilience. To me, this goes back to the psychology of performance and the value of sports psychology. I wrote my master's thesis in sports psychology, and it's an extremely amateur uh, piece of work. But in 1982, as I was beginning my coaching career, I thought, okay, I need to get a master's degree. All the guys coaching college soccer in that time frame had a master's degree in physical education. And I thought, I don't want a master's degree in physical education. I know how to coach this game, but I want to learn how to connect from a psychological perspective. And I think that's always rewarded me in my career. And so I think the challenge for so many coaches is not having the understanding of how do you psychologically prepare players for success. I mean, we've all done the talk, the hard talk, the rah rah, let's go get them kind of talk it
yeah,
before the game or halftime, or it didn't take a long time for me to learn that in soccer you don't get to impact the game very easily. You have to have the right presentation before the game, and you have to have the right presentation at halftime. Those are your only two opportunities. I remember once playing at Clemson with my Harvard team, and they were so flat, and I went in the locker room and I ripped them. I just ripped them.
Yeah.
And in the second half, they were even worse.
Worse.
And I thought, I can't
Yeah.
do that. You can't rip kids like that at that age. They weren't ready for that. And so,
And that's a D1
yeah,
athlete. Let's
right.
take it back to
Yeah,
U10, U11, where you have, some I've seen, some people where coaches were just
right.
screaming and yelling and trying to push these kids.
Yeah. I mean, I knew that already, but I was just so flustered. I kind of lost my head
Yeah.
and thought, God, what are we doing here? And so, this team the next year was in the top 5 in the country, had the longest winning streak in D1. But, on that particular night, they were terrible.
Yeah.
And so, I remember in my first year of coaching as an assistant coach, the head coach at Colgate, I was at Colgate University, and the head coach was a really nice guy, but his main sport was lacrosse. He was the head soccer coach. And so he hired me as his assistant. And he quickly learned that I kind of knew what I was doing, and he let me run the team. And we were having incredible success. But at some point late in the season, I think he felt threatened.
Mm.
And he decided for the first time, that he was going to give the pregame talk. And we were sitting in a wrestling room at West Point playing Army, and it was the pregame talk. And he, the wrestling room's not meant for breathing. And he talked for like 20 minutes before the game. And I could see the players
kind of
almost falling asleep.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, we're in trouble here. And I learned right away, this is, pregame talks, they have to be spot on. You can't do this. And that was the first time I looked at it. I thought, wow, we're in trouble here. And we struggled. We were having a really, really good season, but that night we struggled. And so you learn from a psychological perspective what to do. You can't count on emotion. You learn that if you have an emotional win on a Wednesday, you better be very, very careful how you prepare for the game on Saturday, because the emotional drain is so incredible. I've been to so many Final Fours where a team will play so good on Friday night, and everybody on Saturday's going, oh yeah, they're going to win the national championship. And the next day they come out and they're terrible. They can't do anything. And this is a matter of people watching, and these are all coaches, right? Where they're talking about what they saw, how they felt about the two teams that made it through the semifinals, and they were completely wrong. They didn't get the drain, the emotional, the high, and then the fact that kids are so inconsistent in their performance even at that level. Mm-hmm. And so that's why the psychological part of the game is really, really important to me.
So if I were to sort of debrief right now, and I would say, what, the locker soccer developmental model, or what your philosophy is, certainly at the youngest age groups that we're just introducing this sport to our young women and our young men, these toddler age, these young girls and boys, it's to have fun, be inclusive, have fun, let parents kind of stay at the sideline, let kids make their own decisions within that beehive melee of 5v5, 4v4, 7v7. Let them develop their own confidence, be supportive. As soon as they get into this age range of 11 plus to about 13, 14 years old, now is the time where you kind of keep an eye out for the late bloomers and the physical specimens, and also those a little bit of technical ability, understanding a little bit of tactics, but also understanding that these kids will go through a developmental process emotionally that has to be geared towards resilience. And that resilience is, it doesn't matter if you're on team 1, team B, team X. It just means that you learn the fundamentals of the game, have positive role models and coaches around you that will allow parents to understand that we trust the process. And then finally, what you're alluding to is the psychology behind a coach. And this is, I think, important for those young coaches who may be watching, is love to connect them with you. And I know you do coaching clinics at Locker Soccer. And that, I'm hoping that a lot of parents will kind of buy into this developmental philosophy of yours, Steve, and also coaches can connect with you. But one of the things that I struggle with a little bit, and maybe that's just because of the way I think incorrectly, is that, when our kids go to school and we have parent-teacher meetings and we have a very objective curriculum, and that objective curriculum, we can have feedback. So if my kid's struggling with geometry, and I'm like, well, we're going to have a meeting with your teacher and we're going to understand why you're struggling with geometry. The process of youth soccer, especially when we talk about the U13, 14, 15 plus age ranges, it's so subjective. Is there a role within this psychological development you're talking about, both on the coaching side and the player side, that there's objective feedback for players to look at and say, you know what, Alex, you're very this, that, you're technically able, but tactically you're not sound, and maybe you're athletically really gifted, but your touch is off. These are the things I expect you to work on for that. Or is that too pedantic? Is that too much at the youth soccer level?
So this environment that you describe is really, really interesting. You think about a school teacher and the education that they've gone through to qualify to run a classroom with our children, the certification process, the educational process. And all of a sudden you think, okay, these guys are prepared. We all know that we see teachers that we love, teachers we're not so sure about, we respect, don't respect, whatever. They come in all sizes and packages and different levels of abilities. I think for a minute, how many children are playing soccer? Okay. Now, think also, this is an easy one. How many good referees have you seen in a game from your perspective? Okay.
Yeah.
So we all know how challenging it is to find a referee that we really can respect.
Truly.
Okay. We don't often think about the coaching ranks in these terms. And so you have a very loose term. We have a very loose term in our world called the professional coach. And that is the person, by definition, who gets paid for coaching kids. And it's a sad, sad definition because they are anything but professional. They've had no formal training. They've played the game, and that's their credential. And what happens is, and we have to be careful. I have to be careful because some of them are awesome, right?
Yeah.
I know parent coaches who have limited experience that are far better working with children than these are so-called professional coaches being paid by clubs. And so it comes down to your personality and your ability to relate with children, to motivate children, to create the right environment for children. And so, I think it's really, really hard. These coaches do not have experience. They do not have an educational background. They have not studied the game. And so how do they measure themselves? How do they justify their existence? They're being paid, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 to coach a team. Okay. The way they feel in their mind that they have to justify it is by winning. And this is a really dangerous phenomenon because the last thing I care about is winning when it comes to children and playing. I want to see consistent development and consistent growth. I want to see smiles. I want to see confidence, and I want to see kids having fun. I want to see kids telling their parents, is it time to go to practice? Let's get in the car. That's what I want to see. And so when it comes to objective feedback from coaches, I often hear from parents saying things like, oh, the coaches won't even talk to parents. It's
Right.
like, you don't talk to the coaches. They hold themselves at a different level, and they have this mentality that, outside of the coaching realm, if you're a parent, you have no idea what you're talking about. And I think for that reason, they won't talk to parents. And so you can forget about getting objective feedback. I think for me, providing this objective feedback and this kind of consistent input, it's a challenging thing from a time perspective, but I think it's really important for us as coaches to engage with parents in a positive way and talk about, how their kid's doing, whether it's a positive or a negative. I think it's really important. I'm not writing out a report that says your kid should work on this, this, and this. Okay. What I try to do is I try to communicate with the child first. And so the parent may not get that, but to me, I try to connect with kids individually. I don't try to connect so much with them as a team. So if I take a child off in a game, you'll usually see me put my arm around them or talk to them individually. And basically, I'm telling them what I've seen that's really, really good, because I want them to feel positive. If they've had a really rough time and you can tell they're disappointed, then I can address it and help them understand what to do otherwise. But generally, my communication is kind of a positive input to get them to feel good. I want to be very, very careful about what we sometimes call praising the ordinary. I never overpraise, ever. I err on the other side, actually. I underpraise, I think, because the one danger for me is creating this sense that, if you perform in a very ordinary fashion and you get praised for it, you're setting the bar pretty low. And what you're going to get is you're going to get ordinary kind of effort. And this mundane, ordinary effort cannot be praised because, and I hear it all the time, parents will yell on the field, great kick, or, good job. And it's like, wait a second, that was crap.
Good hustle. Yeah.
Right. Hustle is really important. I mean, hustle and work ethic are the most important things in the world. Because they don't take the same skill or technique that it does to kick a ball in the back of the net. But, if you can reward hustle and ethic appropriately, magic, because creating hardworking players is so important. And so, I think if you understand the background of coaches, you can understand where they're coming from, and you're not going to get a lot out of that in some cases, unfortunately. But if you have a good relationship, I always tell parents, they may talk about a club they don't like or this or that. I'm like, well, how's the coach? I don't care about the club. How's the coach? They go, oh, he loves his coach. I'm like, well, then keep him there, because if he loves his coach, he's happy. And don't change. Everybody wants to look at changing and doing different things. And so, but then on the flip side, I have parents who are so unhappy with the coach, and yet they're afraid to change because they're afraid their kid might get left behind somewhere. And
talk to me about that, because I feel like we've entered this great discussion because it's so pertinent across the board. And I hear this from youth, young men, young women. I've talked to a bunch of parents. Talk to me exactly if what you just said was parents are afraid that they're going to lose an opportunity. And I think you mentioned that in your book, and you really detailed it beautifully in I'm going to plug this book again, Playing for the Long Run by Steve Locker. Read it, parents. You're going to enjoy it. It is a very, very succinct look at what you may be going through, parents, with your young player. Talk to me about that, because you touched on two things, Steve. One is you have a coach that the players love, but you may not be getting the result that you as a parent want, but the kid loves it. They're developing, they're doing great. The alternative is, well, we're afraid that we're not getting what we want. We're going to shift teams now. And I've seen that again and again and again, where there's some parents who are like, well, we're not getting the outcome we desire. We're just going to go to another club. And that may just be my experience, but I don't think it always ends well when you go to another club and you're in another situation, another environment. Maybe it does for kids who may not be getting the type of coaching that they really like. But talk to me, just go a little deeper with me about this fear of missing out of what that is for more for parents than it is for
Yeah.
youth players.
Yeah, I think there's a fear of being left behind, is something that I've looked at and studied and talk about. And I think that has to do with, you know, not pushing their kid enough into these higher level programs, or not being patient enough. And so they want to, if you, they feel like they need to have their kid maybe, there's a league that some teams play in called the ECNL. It's a high
Yeah.
level league. Kids are playing all over the country and
Right.
doing all of that. And then there's teams that are more local. And I can use that as an example. For the last 6 years, I've had high school girl teams, and we just play locally in Ohio. And I've had a percentage of players that I think will blow anyone away when it comes to girls successfully transitioning into college players and having success, over kids who are families who are spending a fortune, a small fortune, to have their kids play on these higher level teams. And the fear is that, or the hope is that, maybe by playing on these teams, they're going to get exposed to higher level coaches, better competition, better teammates, and that kind of stuff. And I think there's potential for that to be true, but it's a dangerous concoction, because there's burnout, there's injury,
Pressure.
there's pressure, there's brutal play. I think there's a real lack of understanding about good soccer in our culture.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks that it has to be physical and brutal. It is a physical game, but I think it's really critical for us as coaches to maintain the integrity of the game and teach these kids how to play the game the right way. That's not happening. There are too many kids getting hurt. I watch the way some of these kids play, and I shake my head, because as a college coach, or as a former college coach, I think there's no one going to touch this kid, because they're committing a foul every time they touch the ball.
Yeah.
Or every time they go up against a 50-50, they're committing a foul, and no coach wants to deal with that. But
Yeah.
yet they're tricked into believing that this is how the game should be played. And it's a dangerous concoction. And so we as parents think, well, I better get my kid on this team, because on that team they can be on the A team, and they can play in this tournament and that tournament. And we have to be honest with ourselves as parents, and just look at it and go, is this really what I want? Do I really want to spend 6 weekends in the fall and spring in a hotel with my family, going, out at 8 o'clock in the morning and playing in 35-degree weather, or the rain or the snow, and having to use porta potties and all that? I have a real kind of approach to the whole tournament thing. But is this really what we want? And is it really helping? And so I never played in a tournament in my life, but so someone was telling me that someone had a tournament recently, and they had like 600 teams or something. I thought, think about how much each team pays, and think about what you're getting into, and there's trophies sitting on the table, and the sportsmanship kind of takes a back seat, because we need to win one of those trophies. And it's just a mess, and so
You seem to,
it's
you
hurting.
Steve, approach the game in such a refreshing way, because you're approaching it just like your book, for the long run. You're bringing in developmental principles, biologic principles at the younger age, and then you're talking about resilience in the sort of mid-level range. But whereas parents, and you recognize, and clearly you've met these parents who are like, well, I need to play ECNL, or I need to play girls academy, or I need to play a developmental academy, and my kids have to be bigger, stronger, faster, tactical and technical. But what you're also alluding to is, are we missing the boat in sort of developing these players into actually understanding how to play the game? Because it seems to be at a certain level that, all these players that go up to these pathways, there's an attrition to that. There's an attrition rate.
Huge.
They're not sticking to the same ascent as what some of our parents, or we believe that the ascent looks like. The ascent looks like that if you're a great player at U11, you'll be an even better player at U14 when you go to ECNL or a developmental academy, and then you
Mhm.
will become a world beater at
Yeah.
U16, U17, but that's not the case.
Mm-mm.
So that's very informative when it comes to parents sort of making that decision. Now, there are other parents, Steve, to your point, who believe that bigger, faster, stronger, or that it's important to play tournaments because you end up, there's a learning curve in tournaments too. You meet
Right.
players from all over the country.
Yeah.
You get to travel, and I think there's growth in travel, and you can play with different,
Incredible. Yep. Yep.
so on and so forth. So there's a balanced perspective here. But what I'm hearing you say is, let the child develop. Let them, if you're lucky enough to have a great coach, and I was thinking about what you said about coaches who really know how to, and shout out to David Carrasco, who's coaches for Sporting Columbus. You've met him. I think he's a phenomenal coach who teaches at a real psychological and developmental level as well as a technical level, to not be just clattering into players and just, faster, bigger, stronger, but actually the beauty of the game, the technical aspect of the game. So
Yeah.
there's a
We
lot of things I think our parents we need to think about once they listen to
right.
what you have to say.
We're lucky. In some ways, we're very lucky. There are a lot of people like a David and Jeff Starks and um, so forth in our community. There's some very, very good coaches in our community, and I'm currently in a process of trying to bring together more from a leadership perspective, because we haven't done that in Central Ohio, but try to connect some of these folks that I believe are really, really quality individuals and create a very special approach to working with with these kids. And I think if we can connect, these quality coaches that exist, we can do some really, really good things. I think there's a lot of fractional environments within the community because of all the clubs that we have currently, trying to make a run at it in the community. And I'm not sure if it's helping or hurting. I think it's making people become more honest about how they do things, which is good. But I think it's spreading out the product a little bit, or the quality of the play, because we're so divided and everything. But there are a lot of really, really good people in the community. It's you know I think it's a very simple process, a simple solution, and it all comes down to falling in love with the game. What are the steps that we can take to help our children fall in love with the game? And if we can do that, and we're successful in helping them navigate that path in a passionate way, we will have immensely successful kids, much more so than we've ever seen. And they'll stay in the game. And that's the part that's really, really cool, is creating this environment for really having fun. And for us parents, just being patient,
Yeah.
because these kids will get good. Just playing the game, they will get good. And everything I learned in my life, whether it was skiing or tennis or soccer or whatever, it came from imitation and copying. We copied and imitated those players above us, and we got good. And I think that's how it works. I mean, some of my best friends that have played even in the World Cup talk about never having had a coach until they were 17 or 18 years old.
Really?
And and
Wow,
so
that's
and
incredible.
so it's really, really important. You look back over the past couple of years or decades, and where have all of the best players been coming from? Where have the players who are making the most money in our game, where are they coming from? And when you examine the environment in which they grew up and developed, you know that it was all pickup for
Yeah,
many, many years.
yeah,
And at some point in their teenage years, they got to be on a team with a coach.
yeah.
And so there's a lot to be said for that. And I think
It's,
that's a
that's a
really
wonderful overview, Stephen. I'm gonna sort of pin you down for two more things that I want to touch to you on.
okay.
What are the um, what are the things you would advise parents? They're coming to you, and I know you get a lot of parents who come to you, but let those who are able to listen to this this podcast, if a parent comes to you and asks you a very simple question, what are the factors or features that I should look at in choosing a club for my young daughter who is 9 years old and is starting to show an interest in soccer? What are the 3 or 4 things that, you would give advice? Because I get some colleagues of mine who ask me about this club or that club, and I really am no one. I really don't give my opinion. I only just say, just the coach. It's about the coach and if you can get along. But what is your opinion about what advice you'd give, 2 or 3 things to a prospective parent and a prospective young athlete?
Well, I think you hit it right on the head when you said it's the coach, and it truly is the coach. That's the person that you will have the most contact with. Certainly, to me, it's important that the club has the integrity that kind of matches up with you as a parent. You know, how much integrity do you have as a parent, and what is important to you in terms of where you put your children and what they're going to learn. I think too much of what's happening in the youth sports is about money. And so most anyone will agree with that, I think. And whenever money gets introduced into the equation, certain other characteristics or traits take a back seat.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if you have to deal with the folks outside of the team or outside of the coach, it's pretty nice to be with a club that shows and has shown a good track record from an integrity perspective. But at the end of the day, it is about the coach. And so, you know, the parents do ask me a lot of questions, just like you said about the club. What club should I look at? And I always tell them it's not the club.
Yeah.
It's the team, or it's the coach. Does the coach create the environment that you respect as a parent? And don't sacrifice your principles just because you think that this club is really good and that's where your kids should be. It's not going to work out. You gotta follow the principles and maintain your integrity and maintain your honesty and open-mindedness about this process.
And a coach who can help your child develop, not just
grow as a person,
yeah,
and a player.
Not
Yep.
single focused on
Right.
an outcome per se,
Right.
but help your child develop.
Right.
Last thing I'm going to ask you, Steve, and you've been so kind and generous with your time. What's the next step for Locker Soccer, the philosophy, and your organization and your sort of your brand? Like, what is the next step for Central Ohio?
That's a great question. And I appreciate you asking that question. So I've been in business. I'm in my 18th year of business now in Columbus, and I've watched and I've worked in the community in many different levels. And as you know, I'm a coach through and through, and I always make an excuse when I talk about the business side of things, and I say I'm just a coach, and it's really true. I took a business course last fall, and it opened up my eyes to potential. I have always considered myself a businessman who flies at about 2,000 feet above sea level. And this business course got me thinking. And I'm now trying to fly at 35,000 feet. I recently bought a new building. We're getting ready to introduce 2 indoor training fields within the building. We're working very, very diligently on developing outdoor turf fields locally, not far away. And we're starting to ramp up a club business and all kinds of different kinds of programming within the academy. I think Locker Soccer Academy has enjoyed a really wonderful reputation in the community as a child development business, where I think the next phase for us is to kind of grow and evolve our reputation as a soccer development company. And so I recently just hired a director who I want to help me run the academy business, being the young child development piece. And what I want to focus on is developing a higher level training development piece for older players, because I can do it. It's what I've done my whole life. And I think I have more experience than anyone in Central Ohio in doing that. So I think it's time for me to look at this environment from a different perspective. So we're looking at developing a major club effort where I want to exert the necessary leadership and experience that I have within the community to grow a special brand of developing kids in a club system from early childhood all the way through to, we actually are going to try and have a couple of third division pro teams, men's and women's, is part of the picture. And so we're in this process right now of kind of developing all of that. I want to develop additional staff to help me do more training and coaching of kids in different age groups to take them from one level to the next. I've had players, I've taken players into the MLS, I've taken players to Europe, and I've had success. So I can do that. That's not that difficult. You just have to you have to have the right people and you have to know how to work with them. And so that's kind of where we're headed. We're trying to evolve the business on a whole new level and trying to create a more cohesive group of top coaches within the area coming under one umbrella. And I think it will give us a really unique look. We will be, I think, the only club in Central Ohio that will own both our own indoor and outdoor facilities and control those in a way that we can do some really, really unique things with the soccer community. So that's kind of where Locker Soccer is headed right now. So
Well,
it's exciting.
Fascinating and exciting. And those who are watching this, I'm sure, have gotten to know Steve Locker, the man behind the brand, and your depth of experiences, and certainly the developmental principles. Everything is development. And I'm just really, really excited to see where it goes. I'm going to, again, for parents, please read Playing for the Long Run by Steve Locker. Everything we talked about and some is in this book. Steve is a legend. Steve is a true leader, a sage, man with many, many pearls of wisdom. And I look forward to seeing how things develop with Locker Soccer Academy. Steve, thank you so much for your time tonight. And I hope to have you back on in the future to unveil
Recap,
version
right?
2.
Well, Safdar, you are incredibly gracious. I thank you so much for this opportunity. I love our conversations, and I look forward to continuing them as well. And I wish you all the best. Thank you so much.